There is a quiet experience many people live inside for years without having a name for it or any language for it. You're present, but then you're not fully here. You're functioning, but then you're disconnected. You can show up, you can actually perform, even succeed, while still having that feeling of strangely far away from yourself. Today, on this episode of Cosmic Confluence Podcast, we are talking about dissociation, not as a clinical label or not as something to fix or fear, but as a lived experience, as something the nervous system does to survive, to cope up when life becomes too much. Listeners, my guest today, well, she's a holistic wellness coach and she's an author whose work is deeply shaped by her personal experience of navigating trauma, mental health challenges, addiction, and long seasons of adversity. Her journey includes a profound breakdown that didn't end everything, but then it ended one way of living and slowly opened the door to another. And let me tell you, listeners, what I appreciate about this conversation that it's not going to be um, fluffy or neat or inspirational or super motivational in a performative way. We're not here to say everything happens for a reason. We are here to sit with complexity, contradiction, and the slow, often uncomfortable work of coming back to yourself. So, if you have ever felt numb, detached, or unreal, or if you have ever wondered why healing doesn't look the way it's advertised, it's around us, I hope that this conversation helps in some or the other way. So, listeners, let's welcome our incredible guest, Kerisma Vere, and let's get on to the conversation. So, Kerisma, welcome to Cosmic Confluence, and as always, it is really an honor to have you here.
Thank you, San. I already heard so much that just ignites my heart and my passion in what you just said. It's wonderful to be here.
Totally, totally. Um, uh, when I was reading the intro and this word really, like I read it out loud, dissociation. Um, Often, yes, it gets tossed around medically in the medical terms or clinical terms, but we would kind of imagine something very extreme. We wouldn't even think about it, maybe. But for many, it's this, subtle um spacing out, or maybe emotional numbness, or living like a robot. Um, how did, for you, Charisma, how did dissociation actually show up in your day to day life? Before you could even realize, or you could name, or, you know, just be aware about it.
Yeah, I think for everybody it can be a different experience, and I think there's a really a wide range. Like sort of that automatic tuning out while we're driving from one place to another that we've been a billion times. That's actually a form of dissociation. And then there's like more severe. Um, And I certainly learned to appreciate that, when I was a child, right up from the first 20 years of my lives, there was so many things that happened internally and externally that were just beyond my ability to cope with. And it wasn't safe in that sense to even be with that stuff. So I think that's where the dissociation originated from, which is very, very common among children as a survival mechanism because we don't have control over our environments and we don't necessarily have the other kinds of skills. Sometimes developmentally, other types of skills are not even possible yet. So sometimes parts of it can be called like a splitting off, and a dissociate. For me, my kind of understanding of it was that there was experiences and aspects of myself and my experience and my feelings that were just beyond anything I could cope with. So I kind of, split off from them, the images I have for that was that, there was this core, core memories of things that had happened, and I just kind of put them all behind a curtain, and it allowed me to live my life as if those things hadn't happened, which actually was a real blessing because when I got kicked out of the house when I was about 16 or 17, and of course, I needed to get a job. Well, I already had a job, but I needed to be able to hold down a job. I needed to be able to pay the rent. I needed to be able to make friends. I needed to be able to function. And so dissociating from the content that wouldn't have allowed me to do that, um, prior to healing it was actually a way to then go on and function, in all the ways that I needed to do and just kind of keep all that information tucked away until such a time as I was actually able and had the resources to be able to deal with it. The cost of it though is that when there are parts of yourself or experiences of yourself inside
Mhm.
that you have walled off that is not safe to get close to, you can't really have a very deep relationship with yourself,
Mm.
because it's like there's all these areas that are off limits, um and then it can take an awful lot of work if dissociation is wearing off or like I personally used soft drugs and soft alcohol as a way to add to that dissociation, but and then my further understanding of it nowadays, I certainly didn't know this at the time, was that, all of that trauma was actually stored in my body. And that was where the disconnecting from my body. I didn't know it at the time, but I was very disconnected from my body, and I mostly lived in my mind. So I did feel feelings, but it was much more a mind than a mind body kind of connection. And then, ironically, all of this kind of unfolded the journey I've been on because I had gotten overweight and I wanted to lose weight. So I discovered, that I needed to be able to be in my body to
Mhm.
do that, and then that was the proverbial Pandora's box that has unwound for the last 14 years.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and um, like I have a lot of thoughts right now, kind of popping in my head. But then before that, one thing, or kind of question that comes to my mind is, especially because um, especially us as children, um, we often how we often use distraction just to avoid to get involved in those tense situations or to um face head on, and especially for children. I mean, when there are tensions or there's some kind of negative happening in your house, you as a child, you just want to kind of distract yourself. So is distraction different from dissociation, charisma, or is it like the first step or one of the many steps towards dissociating yourself?
I think it might be a component of, but I think dissociation goes a little bit further than that. Like, in my day-to-day life as an adult, I will, sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm not able to process something, I'll distract myself for a while. My nervous system will calm down, and then I'll be able to come back and look at it, right?
Yeah.
As children, that's not really that's not what we're doing. We don't have any of that kind of capacity. Um, so if we are distracting it could be a precursor to material that is beyond our ability, but it distraction sort of implies that we're going to come back to whatever that distraction tends to be a temporary thing, right? And as children, if we're trying to get away from an experience and a feeling, um, a belief or whatever like that, it doesn't tend to be temporary. It, because if we're in that circumstance to begin with, chances are, maybe we're having a nightmare and, we have to distract ourselves till the morning when mom and dad can come, but I don't think children actually have that same capacity to just distract in the short term and they go, "Oh, okay, now I'm safe to deal with this." I think distraction probably would be, a fair indication that the if the child is not able to face what is it going on,
Mhm.
that probably really is the foundation of, a place where they're trying to get away from the material, but my understanding of dissociation is it is, there's such an overwhelm going on, such an
Mhm.
inability to be with what is there, and it's not voluntary, it's not conscious, it is simply, how our psyches, our unconscious, our body, our spirit, everything kind of, like, takes over to help us adapt to, a situation. I mean, you're referring to it as negative kind of events. I think what we're talking about is what they call adverse childhood experiences, right? And it when children have even one safe adult that can help them process that and
Mhm.
integrate it, then the dissociation doesn't necessarily have to occur, right? Because that is my understand again, I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is for children, it experiences when we're unable to integrate the information, um, which is like a lived experience, right? When we're unable to integrate it, we split off from it. And like I said, with just even one stable adult that's able to help us integrate it, then that dissociation doesn't have to occur. But we need help, and many of us as children didn't have it,
Yeah,
regardless of the degree of trauma.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. Um, and I mean, must have been very, very challenging or maybe overwhelming, for the lack of better word, to kind of, come out of that, um, uh, come out of that shell, or, shed that layer, or leave that behind, Charisma, for you. I mean, um, how it all felt like in the beginning. Was it like overwhelming for you, or were you finally relieved?
Well, it wasn't, and this is part of my, um, the stuff I read about in my book and other thing like this. I believe that nothing is this instant idea. It wasn't oh, the, um, the wall cracked and then I could see everything. It actually took me I was in therapy for like 20 years when I was younger, and I was unaware that I wasn't being present, like, my therapist would ask me a question, and I would almost never answer the question that she asked me because I couldn't stay present with it. I wasn't actually present in the room, so we weren't actually having a back and forth kind of conversation, everything that she was saying was kind of like, triggering me, and because I wasn't present with myself, I wasn't able to stay present with the conversation, and I didn't even know that was happening, and, I'm not too pleased with the therapist that I had because I don't feel that, she did a very good job of identifying that and helping me work through it, um, in a timely kind of, way, and unfortunately, I saw her as, an expert of sorts, so I never really questioned it, but, so that I slowly became aware, I'm not being present. There's information on the inside here that I, that is preventing me from having that connection to myself, and I chose to look at it, and it's very much if you've ever seen that image of the iceberg, and there's the tip of the iceberg above the water, and then there's the whole bigger portion of the iceberg below the water. So, what happened for me was that I thought that I had dealt with the entire iceberg, I spent, many years kind of looking at, getting close to, processing all the material that first opened up when I was willing to look behind that curtain, and I actually thought I was, like, all good, had overcome everything, da 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 da, and I had a period of my life where I was actually thriving, I stepped up, and I was doing really well in so many ways, and then that's when the breakdown happened, it's slowly over a period of 1 or 2 years, I started seeing the world through the lenses that I'd had as a children and started interpreting experiences happening in my present day as if they were the experiences I'd had when I was younger, and I wasn't aware that it was happening, and the therapist I had at the time didn't recognize it, didn't help me, in fact, and had not prepared me that this kind of thing could happen, and anyway, I sort of lost everybody and everything except for the roof over my head as all of this material that I had no clue was there began to, flood me, and I found myself, mentally, health-wise, um, and emotionally in a place that was, like, sort of way worse than I had ever remembered, and I felt particularly betrayed because I had worked diligently for a good 20 to 30 years, through it all, and I was so confused by what was happening and um, felt so betrayed, but now what that was one of the magic moments was meeting a really, really good trauma therapist at the right time, kind of when I'd exhausted all options, and I've been able to, slowly work through all of that, material, and, I used to put it into black and white language. I thought, I really for those for about 6 years before my breakdown, I really thought that I was no longer dissociative and that that was possible, but what I understand today is as human beings, we're all dissociative sometimes, but just on a scale. And a healthy scale is, a little bit here and there, right? As opposed to like so completely that we're walled off from big major parts of our self. So yeah, it wasn't really a quick kind of thing. There was
Mm.
the first part that came and then after that was was so much. And now I think that, it's still true. I have a susceptibility. Like I had surgery a couple of years ago and it was an emergency surgery and I lost part of my spleen and ended up with a stoma and it was a 5-hour surgery and it was traumatic. So I was actually fairly dissociative again, like on a larger scale for a good month, but I had a good therapist this time. I was aware that was going on, and I had some really good strategies for getting me reconnected um, to everything so that I could mitigate that and come back to being, like, much more present.
Yeah, I think this can sound a bit heartbreaking, but then I think there is something powerful here, especially when we talk about breakdowns. Like, people often frame breakdowns as failures of strength or resilience, that it's kind of, it can look like, as if nothing is ever going to work out for me. Um, but I believe that this collapse, it isn't punishment. It is information, like a signal that the system, which is your inner body or your self, your physical, your emotional, your spiritual self, it had been carrying more than it could hold alone, so it needs more time.
Yeah, I when I was younger, I've
Mhm.
always been a fan of tarot cards, and anyway, when I was in my teens and early 20s, I always got the Tower, and the Tower was, I'm paraphrasing here, but the tower collapses, and you're standing amongst rubble, and the thing to know is that the old structure had to fall away for something new to be built, and I hated
Mhm.
that card at the time, and it would happen in little bits, but yeah, in 2018, when I had the full breakdown, that was that card came to my mind. I was like, "Whoa, this is it." But it took me, probably 5 years of, like, starting to be able to get back on my feet again, to start to understand what a real gift things falling apart had been, and to understand that I was so headstrong and stubborn in doing things my own way that it kinda took that much of a knocking me down to my knees to get me to really pay attention and be willing to do things differently, but now what I've created with myself is true unconditional love, a true ability to thrive and feel all of my feelings. And I think probably this is like the strangest gift of all, but it gave me back myself in the sense that I now know my history. I did not really actually remember those first 20 years accurately, and they distorted the rest of my life. So, as heartbreaking as it can be to know some of the things that I went through and really remember the feelings and everything that was I'm also very, I'm beyond grateful because in this sense, I have reclaimed parts of myself that were wounded and um they deserve to be honored even if like I actually tend to myself, but beyond that just knowing, just the fact that I now know and those parts of me that got exiled and shunned and never had any the attention that they needed, I've been able to provide
Mm.
that for them. But again, I to have a coherent history and to actually understand my own experiences, and be able to hold space for them is a double-edged gift, but it's a gift I wouldn't trade for anything, regardless of how hard that breakdown was, and that's one of the reasons why it's a breakthrough rather than a breakdown.
Yeah. Yes. 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 I think absolutely. It did make sense. It makes sense. And uh, before we conclude here, Charisma, um, you you speak about relationship as foundational. Um, just I'm just trying to bring a nuance here. Like sometimes for many people, turning inward without safety, it can feel destabilizing. Like even in my some of my own experiences, I I mean, if I would like to remember, recollect here, I wouldn't prefer to be alone or just self-focus, um, and think that what I can do or what is happening right now, or just be in the present. Like maybe for me it would mean that I have to be completely isolated. Then only I can just somehow deal with it everything, or maybe I have to uh, completely numb myself and put my mind into something else just to move away or distract once again
Yeah,
myself.
I don't think that is the I don't think that's where healing happens. I think that's where re-experiencing happens because like, I mean, my history is a lot of relational trauma, and, it's commonly known that relational trauma is healed in community. So for me to just face it and deal with it on my own is there it misses that that being connected to others. Sometimes, like, on my own, I can't
Mhm.
connect to the humanity and that I'm not alone. But that's after years and years of having worked with somebody that's helped me actually be able to do that. Independence is a good thing, but interdependence is a better thing. And independence is often actually a trauma response, and we are human and we actually need connection, and trauma often cuts us off from that connection. And then my experience with working with people that don't have the best relationship with themselves, um it tends to be the older generations. I'm 55, so women older than me and a little bit younger than me, and it's some of it is really deeply embedded in trauma, and those of us that have needed to sort of like, get away from all of the stuff, the pain and struggle and trauma on the inside. And some of it, it's actually been just what we internalized and was expected, that we weren't allowed to put ourselves first, that having a relationship with yourself was selfish. And some religions even back that up. And then society as a large, yes, we're taught to, like, be grateful and be there for other people and give back like all the how often do you hear a message that actually says prioritize yourself, put yourself
Mm,
first, and we are I think we all seek to have really good relationships, but did we ever understand that that starts with the relationship that we have with ourselves? And were we ever taught how actually to do that in a way that is not based on perhaps the things that we learned, like discipline and coming down hard and all those kinds of things, but actually with like love and support and encouragement and nurturing and unconditional support, which is how many of us treat our friends and family and loved ones. But to learn how to treat ourselves that way and have that kind of a connection with ourselves, um, I think is actually one of the most worthwhile things that we can ever pursue. But you're right. I think people would be wise to not try to do it all on their own. And depending on your story or where you're at in that journey, there might be different levels of support that would be best fitting. Like I'm a bit of a hybrid coach, so I can help people with a lot of that. When it goes beyond my scope, I always recommend a counselor, and
mm,
ironically, my book, The Light Switch Myth, I got this great review by this fellow, and he pointed out that where we disagreed was that I was proposing from doing it in a sort of in a independent kind of way, which I had missed, and I
mm,
think for him, he has a faith-based approach to it, that he's not doing it alone, that he's doing it with spirit, or whatever his thing is. And I'm starting to develop that way myself. So whether I think I'm trying to say that is to like whether you bring your higher power into the moment, or a counselor or a coach, or some of us even have like friends that are able to hold some space for that, or we can get involved in groups, or there's many ways to access support if the material on the inside is such that it is wiser to use caution in approaching that. And I'd say always listen. We want to be able to push past our comfort level, but we also
mhm.
want to really respect what those limits are, because they're there for a reason.
I think it can be it can be more perfect to explain this because I believe, Charisma, that this distinction it is absolutely crucial. Like and especially the independence and the interdependence that you mentioned. I think no nervous system learns safety alone. Connection for me, and it's safe to say connection precedes self connection, and that is something we don't say often enough. So and of course, I think healing at whatever level is possible is done best at a community level, and that is something we need right now. Thank you so much, Charisma, once again. This was really a very I must say candid and practical discussion, especially on dissociation. I have personally learned a lot from here uh, because I actually didn't really very much know about it. So I really appreciate that you, through your lived experiences and uh, through your journey, you are helping out others there to be aware about it. I think that is the first step, awareness and acknowledgement. So if our listeners, they would like to further connect with you, maybe they have their own experiences or their own thoughts or opinions, how they can share that with you.
Absolutely. I always welcome comments, and I'm happy to engage with anybody. Towardswellness.ca is my like wellness hub, and you'll find my books and a little bit about me and about the coaching and newsletter and all kinds of social links, so you can reach out to me any kind of way. But I would start at towards wellness.ca. And I think, Sana, I just want to finish that. You're right. Healing does happen in connection with others, but we need those spaces that do actually allow us the opportunity to really be seen and heard and meet ourselves where they are at. And the average everyday person doesn't have those skills. So that's where it can be really helpful to find some places where people can hold space for us in that way to be our companion on that inward journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the key word here is safe and without any judgment, with empathy, because all we want is, someone to hear us and someone to see us. That's what we are screaming out loud. So, yeah, it all makes sense, Charisma.
Okay.
Super. So, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And I think what this conversation reminds me, at least, is that healing isn't about becoming whole overnight. It is about restoring contact between our body and mind, past and present, self and world. And dissociation isn't a failure of consciousness, it is consciousness doing the best it could with what it had. And sometimes breakthrough isn't clarity or joy, it's just simply the ability to stay. So, to everyone listening who feels disconnected, foggy, or distant from themselves, you are not broken. You are just responding. And one day, gently, at your own pace, you may find yourself stepping back into your life. Not all at once, but moment by moment. So, thanks once again for tuning in. If this conversation resonated or connected with you, share it with someone who may get help by hearing this, and connect with Charisma. I'll have all the links mentioned in the show notes. Find them attached along with this episode. And until next time, this is your host, Sana, signing off from Cosmic Confluence. Thank you.